Hello, my name is Steve Larson. I teach viola at the Hart School of the University of Hartford. This video is a little bit of help to prepare for the Connecticut All-State requirements for this year. The requirement is the first 50 bars or so of the Schumann Marchenbilder second movement. And I'm going to give you some talking points later in the video, but first you're going to hear me play a full tempo version. And then you're going to hear me play an under-tempo version, which I think for your practicing might be even more useful than hearing the full tempo version. So do try and listen to both versions. Thanks. So there are lots of different challenges in this particular piece. The rhythm is a little bit tricky. The intonation is challenging, especially because of all the shifting and because of all the double stop thirds. And the musical character is challenging, and that's closely related to the rhythm. So when you're approaching the piece, you want to have different approaches. You want to look at the technical aspects kind of independently. You want to have a good overall sense of the character of the piece. And then have practice strategies for putting those parts of your musicianship together. So let's talk first about the general character of the piece. This is a march movement. It's marked lebhaft, which is German for lively. So it's supposed to be a fairly fast tempo. The only other really hard to understand instructions in the piece are something right near the end of that little excerpt, measure 49 and 50. It says, etwas zurückhaltend, which simply means somewhat held back or holding back. It's just a German instruction meaning do a retard, slow down, while you do the diminuendo to finish that section. So that's fairly easy to understand. The march rhythm, that dotted rhythm, is very important for the character of the piece. You've got to make sure that you don't end up playing triplet rhythms, dum, da, dum, da, dum, because that sounds too loose and lazy for a march, which is supposed to have a certain energy to it, dum, da, dum, da, dum. And then there's the dotted rhythm with the 32nd notes, ta, da, dum, ta, da, dum, ta, da, dum. Those are supposed to sound like military drums, snare drums, ta-da-dum, ta-da-dum. So it's got this very high energy rhythmic character, and it's lively. It's supposed to be fairly fast. Now, if you listen to different recordings of this piece, you're going to find quite a range of tempos that people do it at, and it can be done very effectively at different tempos. So, for instance, I listened to a recording of Yuri Bashmet and checked what tempo he was doing it at, and that was at quarter note equals 108. I listened to another recording, which is fabulous, Tabia Zimmerman. There was a live video that I found, and she does it, her and her pianist do it quite fast, and that was something like quarter note equals 130 or 132. That might be a bit of a stretch for a lot of high school players, especially if it's the first time you're playing the piece. So I would recommend aiming for one of the more moderate tempos as your final tempo. Something like quarter note equals 108 is a really good goal. If you want to experiment getting it up to quarter note equals 120, that's great. But when you actually go to perform it, you have to make sure that you are in command at whatever tempo you play it at. There are some upside down up bows marked throughout the piece. Those are actually accent markings. It's just Schumann's particular way of marking strong accents. So the very beginning, the downbeat of the first measure and the second beat of the first measure, those upside down up bows are actually accents. And you'll notice that those occur throughout the piece. There's also some sforzandos, also very sharp accents, emphasis points. There are not very many dynamic markings through the piece. Actually, the whole thing is marked forte from the beginning until measure 31, and then there's a piano, and then there's a crescendo back to fortissimo for the ending of that section, then a little diminuendo. So not particularly complicated as far as dynamics go, but within the forte, you can't just play 31 measures exactly the same dynamic. So you have to be shaping all the time. So, for instance, the very beginning, ba-dum, ba-da-dum, has to be played quite strong, but you don't have to play quite as strong for the pickup to measure 3, so that you have somewhere to go in the next in the phrase that follows. So my strategy is to treat the very beginning close to a fortissimo, and then think mezzo forte for measure 3, so that I can crescendo a little bit to measure 6. And that makes some nice shapings. And you'll notice in any good performance, and hopefully in the videos that I did, that that there is a shaping going on, even when the dynamic is officially just all forte. You have to make some shape within your phrases. So let's talk about some of the other challenges. Let's talk about the double stop thirds. So double stop thirds, it's really important to map how far the fingers need to be spaced on the fingerboard. For instance, if you look at the double stops in measure 1 and 2, it's basically 3 different fingered notes plus the open A string. Your first finger A is a whole step above your open G. Your F natural on the C string is a whole step plus a half step above that on the C string. So you can map that 2 different ways. You can play B flat, which is in the key signature, so that's kind of nice for you to understand pitch. And the F is a whole step over there. And that gives you exactly the right distance to play that first thing in 2. That B flat, if you just move it straight across your D string, you can see that the F natural is a half step above where your first finger is. So the map for the first 2 bars is really just a whole step from the open to the first finger, and then a half step to the second finger, and a whole step to the third finger. And that gives you all 4 of those notes, because the open A you get for free. I'll do another one so you can get a sense. If you look at the double stops in measure 1, 2, 3, 4, measure 4, you play a couple double stops in 3rd position. The middle of the bar is a first finger G and the 3rd finger E. And the next double stop is a 2nd finger A and a 4th finger F. And you can think of those 2 sets of double stops as one finger pattern, and it's a great exercise to tune it like this. And you can see that my interval pattern is a whole step between 1 and 2, a whole step between 2 and 3. Even though they're across strings, that's a perfect fourth interval, I can still think of it as a whole step in terms of the distance between fingers. And then a half step between the 3 and the 4. So again, you can play G, A, leave those fingers on the string, third finger on E, fourth finger on F, and now you've got your 4 and your 2, that's the F and the A, and you lift those and you get the 3 and the 1. Any pair of double stop thirds that you have in the same position, you can do the same kind of work. So if we look at the next set of double stops in first position, you have open A, this is in measure 5, you have open A and F, and then B flat and G, and you can map that as see that the map for that is just a half step from the open to the first finger, and then 2 more whole steps, even though that first whole step takes you across strings. You get that nice little map. And the next pair of double stops, I'll just do this last one, then we're done with thirds. The next pair goes to second position, the pickup to measure 6. And that double stop is the fourth finger B flat, second finger D, and the double stop right after that is a first finger C and a third finger A. And those are both in second position, and I can map them. C on with first finger, D with second finger. Now I cross strings to third finger on the A. So that approach to figuring out the map of intervals or half steps and whole steps, double stops, really, really very valuable. And of course, within those double stops, you can find other things to tune. You can find notes that match one of your open strings. For instance, when I played my first finger C, that should make my open C string ring. And if I'm not sure, I can do what I just did. I can play the open C and tune the first finger. Same, the D is an easy one. I can tune that with the open D string. Third finger A. Now I can't tune it unless I lift my other fingers, which I don't want to do in certain situations, but if I'm not sure if I've got that A on the right pitch, and you can see I was a little sharp on that one. The B flat, there isn't an open string that matches it, but you can very easily judge that pitch if you've got an in-tune third finger A. You can judge that half step melodically. And then, of course, your thirds have to sound in tune with the right kind of sound that you're doing, a little bit of vibrato if you're planning to vibrate, or if you can vibrate. Now, the technique for thirds, I've been leaning forward to show you my fingerboard. Now I'm going to play in normal position and show you a little bit about how to get the double stop thirds to be comfortable when you're actually playing. When we normally play just on one string, if we want to play, say, a fast scale, we have to set our hand and our arm so that we can get all of our fingers to the fingerboard, which means I have to turn my hand a little bit so that my fourth finger can reach the fingerboard easily. Now, that's a little bit of, I have to just kind of make that happen a little bit. There's a little bit of work involved, but not too much. Shouldn't be very tense. Just a little bit of concentration to get that into the right position. Now, when you have to play double stop thirds, your third finger and your fourth finger have to be able to reach across to a lower string without touching the upper string. So that requires bringing my arm much farther around, getting my fingers very tall to be able to reach over. So if you look at my arm position now, my forearm is quite a bit around and forward, so I can very easily see my forearm from my playing position. So if you're trying to play your double stops thirds and you can't see any of your forearm, chances are your arm's not in the right position, and you'll get a much better result for your fingers and for what it sounds like if you get that arm around some more. Okay? The dotted rhythms. As I said before, you want to really make sure that they don't sound kind of lazy and loose by playing a triplet-like rhythm. Dum, 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 dum. That's really kind of the kind of rhythm you would get in a 6/8, where you'd have a quarter note and an eighth note. You don't want your dotted rhythms in this piece to sound like that. You want crisp dotted rhythms. I mean, your long note has to be long enough, and the 16th note has to be late and close to the next note. Dum, da dum, da dum, da dum, like that. So when I practice this piece slowly, I actually do close to double dotted rhythms, because once it gets going faster, it's very hard technically to keep the dotted rhythm from getting sloppy and a little bit lazy. So when I play slowly, I'm actually overdotting. So I'm actually playing, instead of, that's an exact dotted rhythm. When I practice this piece slowly, I play something closer to a double dotted rhythm. Not exactly double dotted, but not anything like a triplet. I make sure that that little note isn't early and it's very close to the next note. So when you listen to my slow my slow version of the piece that I recorded for you, you'll hear that I'm not really doing exact dotted rhythms. I'm doing over dotted rhythms, and that's so that when I go faster, I end up with exactly the right rhythm for the dotted rhythms. Because once you go really fast, the full tempo, say quarter note equals 112 or 120, it's actually almost impossible to double dot because it's going so fast. So you know the over dotted practicing at the slow tempo prepares you for the real rhythm at the full tempo. Then there's some obviously there's some high shifting work to worry about. Not too much until the very near the end, around measure 30, 36. And there's all sorts of different fingering choices you can use. And you can watch my slow video and see if you can figure out what fingerings I'm using. But for this spot, I'll show you. I finish the double stops in measure 34 in second position. And I just stay in second position for the next three notes. 4. Then I go to fourth position, and it's very important when you're working on your shifting that you have as much information as possible about where you're going, where you're coming from, what the distance is. In this case, I'm going to shift from a second finger D in second position. I'm going to shift to this note, an A, but I'm going to do that with my first finger in fourth position. So if you look where my first finger used to be, it was on an F. It's got to go there. That's 2 whole steps, or a major third. So I know the distance I'm going. I'm going 2 whole steps. And I know what position I'm starting, second position, and what position I'm going to, fourth position. So I'll play those notes. Hopefully you could see that I was aiming my first finger at the spot that I'd identified earlier with my third finger. That's another way of saying I mapped it out. Now, when you go past third position, crucial thing is that you have to start to come around the instrument a little bit, especially once you get to the higher positions. Fourth position, you only have to come around a little bit. You don't have to exaggerate. You can almost go straight up like third position. You just have to come around a tiny bit. And then I continue up that passage, second position to start, fourth position, then I go to sixth position, and that's this note here, but I'm going to go with my first finger, and so my first finger was on an A in fourth position. It's going to go a half step plus a whole step, or a minor third, to sixth position, and for that I really have to bring my arm around. And you can see that the base of my thumb is on my ribs, and it's even exposing the bottom of my instrument if you look in the mirror. And my thumb has come out quite a distance. That's sixth position. The last note I do with my third finger as a little bit of an extension. From the second finger A, it's a minor third, so it's a whole step plus a half step. So it's not a big extension, it's very easy to reach, and my third finger vibrato is a lot better than my fourth finger vibrato. And it's actually, once you get into the really high positions, it's actually easier to get your third finger to the fingerboard than it is to get your fourth finger. So I use, for high notes where I want a nice vibrato, and when there's a convenient way to do it, I very often will use my third finger extended rather than my fourth finger. So that passage should look something like this. Slightly around with the arm. Slightly around more with the arm. Extend. And I like to do the next passage in second position. That's where I started. And if you remember, that's where you started. It's easier to find that note, that F in second position, because that's really where you were before. So, that was a wrong fingering right at the end there. In terms of practice strategies, you've got to do all those different bits of mapping and sorting out the rhythms. And then you've got to do maybe some intonation work. Intonation work, one of your best tools for intonation work is knowing what key you're playing in. This piece is, the whole first section of this piece is in F major. And so you get a lot of benefit by just practicing a few scales and arpeggios in F major, and do some scales in double stop thirds. And you can look at any scale book, the Flesch scale book, or Barbara Barber, or Michael Kimber. Any good scale book will have scales in double stop thirds. And so it would be a really great idea for you to practice scales in double stop thirds in F major. And you can do the scale work you're doing, and you can do the practicing for this piece with an F pedal, or with an A, F and an A, which is the tonic and the major third, or you can use the dominant, the C, using one of those pedal tones to go through large passages of the piece or the whole thing will really help you hear pitches more accurately and really refine things. So I do that a lot when I'm practicing. I try to understand what key the piece is in, and I find a pedal tone or different pedal tones that make sense for large sections, and I'll just play note by note very carefully, making sure that I'm tuning things in a way that rings with the pedal tone. Once you've kind of got things well on their way to understanding the rhythm, and well on your way to understanding the intonation and the shifting, your metronome is your best friend. So you can use the metronome creatively in a bunch of different ways. As I said earlier, your target tempo for this should be something like quarter note equals 108 or 112. If you've played the piece before and you've got a really strong technical foundation and you want to try and push it a little faster, you can certainly try and go up to 120 or something like that. But for most of you approaching this piece for the first time, 108 or 112 is going to be an excellent goal. So you can put the metronome on quarter notes, and a great starting tempo would be something like quarter note equals 60. And so I will kind of imitate that with my foot here. notice that I was doing a little bit of that overdotting that I talked about earlier. And you notice that once I have my metronome going, which I was doing with my foot just now, I don't cheat any of the long notes or any of the rhythms. If I'm going to play through a passage with metronome, I'm going to do it exactly the way the rhythm is written, with that little adjustment for overdotting, just so that I practice the amount of bow I'm going to need for the long notes. I don't want to get any weird habits of playing the wrong rhythm in a long note just because I'm maybe getting bored on the long note and I want to get through it faster. No, you have to actually practice these things at the right tempo or at the right rhythm in relation to everything else. So if that's too fast, you can break it down even farther in small chunks of music. So you could practice that very beginning. You could practice it with eighth notes. You could, 1 and 2 and. And just practice that much a bunch of times with the metronome going in eighth notes. Once you get going faster, if you get, say, quarter note up to 80, if you have a metronome or an app on your phone that will give you a differentiated beat, so a higher pitch or a louder beep on the downbeat and a weaker one on the second beat, something like bop, 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 that helps you feel the piece more musically because the music is written in 2/4. That means that the downbeat is supposed to be a little bit stronger normally than the second beat. So that doesn't really apply to the very beginning. Both of the downbeat and the second beat are very strong. But once you get going at measure 3, it should sound a little bit like this. 1, 2. So a lot of the downbeats are emphasis spots, and then the second beat is supposed to be a little bit less. So if you can use your metronome to help you get used to feeling that. So I'm talking about really feeling the piece in one, as if there's really only one big beat in the bar. Now, when you're going slow and playing with metronome, you can't put the metronome too slow. If you try and play with metronome at half note equals 30, that's really hard to do successfully and hard to do musically. So you're better off putting the metronome at quarter note equals 60, but with an emphasized downbeat, if you can get your metronome to do that somehow. So all the time you're doing all this technical work and this metronome work and tuning with pedal tone, always keep in the back of your mind that character that I talked about earlier, that it's a march and it's supposed to be lively and it's supposed to have a lot of thrilling energy. And all of the technical work that you're doing is really just to get to that point where you can share with the audience that excitement, the rhythmic excitement and the character excitement of the piece. And try and remain very engaged in your practicing. Try not to go on to autopilot and just play through things without being aware of what exactly you're doing. If you go to repeat a section, or you decide, oh, I played through it once, I should play through it again, you should have a reason for playing through a section again or playing through the whole piece again. Don't just decide, oh, I'm going to play it again, because that's not really great practicing. You want to have a specific goal in mind. So if you play the first line of the piece and you decide, oh, I should play it again, you should try and identify what was it about the first time through that you thought was good, and what was it that needed improvement, and really focus on trying to improve those things as you do it the second or third or fourth or fifth time. Because if you don't know what you're trying to improve when you're practicing, it's unlikely to actually improve. So I think that's enough chit-chat, and I encourage you to really enjoy this piece. Listen to a lot of different recordings. Listen to my recording. Listen to recordings with piano, though, because the piece is a real duo, and you'll get a lot of benefit by understanding how the viola part fits with piano. So don't just listen to my recordings that are earlier in this video. And have fun with it, and good luck with the auditions.